Hello everyone, welcome to yet another video of interview guide. So today we are going to cover related to concept related to constructors, and this particular video is from the OOPS section. So today we are going to discuss about things related to constructor, and for initially we should like generally when we talk about constructors, we generally think that it's a very small topic, and there would not be much questions about it, but the actual fact is it's not just like there are many types of constructors, right? So out of which we would be discussing all of them, right, and all the interview questions associated with it. So let's have a quick look of what all the like what are different things related to constructors. So first, let's talk about let's have some basic understanding of what exactly the constructor does, or what exactly is the things around them. So whenever a class is created, a constructor is called. So it's one of the basic things. Like if you want to initialize some variables or some kind of properties associated with that particular class, we generally create a constructor, some kind of basic initialization as a part of a property. So whenever we create a class, a constructor would by default be called, right? A class can have multiple constructors. These are some of the facts, I would say. In a class, you can have multiple constructors, right? But this particular part is true only in terms of if you're having a normal class. If you're having a static constructor, right? If you're having a class with static, then you cannot declare multiple constructors inside them, like multiple static constructors. You can have multiple constructors, but not static, right? A constructor should never have any kind of return type. So if you write a void or int as a part of a return type, then that's not possible. It just does the initialization or setting up the memory inside the while creating the program. It sets up a memory. It just allocates a space onto your computer. It doesn't does any kind of return type, like returning anything from that. So it doesn't. A constructor would never have any kind of return type. Access modifier is optional, right? So if you don't provide any kind of access modifier onto a particular constructor, it would be by default, it would be private. Yeah. A class can have only one static constructor. Yeah. So we already discussed this. A static constructor cannot be parameterized, right? So this is one of the feature we can say, you cannot in normal constructors you can parameterize them, but a static constructor, if you're having a constructor that is static, you cannot parameterize it, right? Also, you cannot use virtual keywords or overall keywords in constructor. Let's have a quick look of what are different type of constructors we have, right? So one of the constructor is a default constructor, right? A default constructor, I would say, is something which doesn't have it is just a plain constructor with nothing into it, right? It is also called as parameterless constructor. Yep. So also when so say for example, if you declare a class without any constructor, Microsoft or the compiler, uh, basically the compiler would create a default constructor on its own, right? So even so we would have a look at this all types of constructors one by one. The another type is a parameterized constructor, where you declare a constructor with different parameters would be passed as a part of a constructor. Yeah. There is a static constructor which says that you're declaring a static constructor. Apart from this, I would also say there are private constructors, yeah, and a copy constructor. So these are different type of constructors we have, right? We would have a look at all of them, yeah, one by one. apart from this, I would also say how we actually use inside the coding language, and in the end we would cover the different Q&As associated with it, right? So this particular as of now, in your right hand screen you can see there are different kind of constructors I have created, right? Just to quickly summarize them. So the first is a default constructor, right? So over here you can see I have not declared any kind of constructor. So when I generally write a person p equal to new of person, what happens is the compiler on its own create a default constructor which has nothing into it. So a default constructor would get created on its own when I write person p equal to new of person p, right? Which has nothing into it. So once I do this particular, so this one is an example which is a plain example, not much into it. The another example that I would say is an object of an, so I'm creating a class of an employee, right, which takes the string a first name and a last name. Now I'm concatenating, like I'm just filling up the values of the employee, passing it as a parameter, right? So string f, so over here you can see I'm just writing it as public employee, right, with first name and last name, and passing this as a parameter. So so as I told that what would happen, say for example, if I write employee, because generally it should happen, right? Employee equal to new of employee with no parameters passed. So will it work or not? So let's have a quick look at how it works. Yeah. So and yep, so let's have a quick look. So what I've done is, so over here you can see I'm declaring a person p equal to new of person p. I don't have any kind of constructor over here, right? But the compiler on its own creates a default constructor, yeah, and then it works on its own, right? Yeah. So now over here I have declared it as employee e equal to new of employee, right? And in the end I'm writing this, I'm outputting this particular whole is I'm creating the object of e dot first name and e dot last name. You can see a running version of this wherein you can see the first name and the last name over here, right? So let's have a look if I, what would happen if I do employee. I would just write it just to quickly, yeah, I would just write it over here like this: employee e1 equal to new of employee, yeah. So what do you think? This particular thing, I'm just getting it as a by default it should create a default constructor, right? But over here it's there is the compiler is not able to create this particular constructor. The reason behind it is there is no argument that corresponds to this particular, like the class is not having any kind of constructor, right? So now what I've done is I've created a employee class with employee E1 as an object, and I have not passed any kind of parameters over here. So so now you can see over here, I've created, I'm expecting the class to create a default constructor, but this would not happen because I have written in the class that it should pass some kind of parameters. I've just given a single constructor. So by default, the class should, like whenever you're creating an object of the class, it should follow by this particular rule. So if I write it something like this, Sam, yeah, uh, comma Joe, yeah, something like this, then things would start working, right? So over here you can see that if I write a constructor, like it says that there is no argument that corresponds to the required formal parameter of this particular. So the program like the class employee expects two parameters, that is the first name and the last name, but I'm not passing it. Hence the compiler is not uh, creating a default constructor on its own. Yep. So if you're declaring a class with no default constructors, with having just one constructor, you should be abiding with that particular way, like I would say, abiding by the definition of that particular class, that you have to pass all the, say for example, if I could create a default constructor inside this particular class, then it would work. But if you don't create any kind of constructors, then the compiler would create a default constructor on during runtime. But if you are creating a constructor with some specific requirements, you have to follow that particular, like when you're creating a class object, you have to follow that particular defined way of writing the code, right? So if it has 2 or 3 parameters, then you will have to write pass the parameters over there. Yeah. Let's have a quick look at the copy constructor itself. So what I would be doing is I'm just as a part of this particular part, I would be also taking a look where we can have a quick look at uh, the copy constructor as well. So let's go through the understanding first. Like, so we discussed that a default constructor is also called an empty constructor. A constructor without any constructor is called a default constructor. So if you're having I would say a class without any constructor, yeah, is called a default constructor. Yep. So we have a looked at it. So this is a class without any kind of constructor, then the person class P, right? So this particular class is not having kind of any kind of constructor, then I would say it's a default constructor. How about the parameters constructor? A constructor with some parameters during the initialization is so if your class is having some kind of parameters into it, right? The constructor, if the constructor is having some kind of parameters to it, then we would say it as a parameterized constructor. So this one is an example of a parameterized constructor, right? Wherein you can see that the parameterized constructor is you're just having a parameterized constructor. And also we have had a quick look at if I can use just an employee, but it was not possible. Let's see what happens if I use if I declare this particular class to be static. Yeah, so you can see over here. So cannot declare instance members inside a static variable. So that's it by default class. But you can see over here, static classes cannot have instance constructor. What would happen if I write this one as a static? Yeah, so I have written this particular stick thing as static. Then it would say the second error that comes over here is the static constructor must be parameterized. Yeah, must be parameterless. Yeah, so a static constructor, you can clearly see over here, the static constructor must be parameterless. Yeah. So okay, what would happen if I use a virtual keyword? See, the virtual keyword is not valid for this particular item. So you cannot declare keywords like virtual, abstract, or sealed, anything on a particular constructor. Even you cannot use a void, or if I say it's a integer, so a return type cannot be the same. Like you cannot uh, return. So it is saying that the members cannot be same as the enclosing type, because I'm not returning. What would happen if I write return 0? Yeah. So you can see over here, I'm getting an error while I write. Also, uh, must not be followed in an object expression, so I cannot return it from any kind of constructor over here. Yep. So we can have a quick. So okay, so these were some of the points related to constructor. Also, I would say let's have a quick look at the copy constructor as well. So a copy constructor. When we discuss about copy constructor, a quick question comes to our mind that why would we actually require a copy constructor, right? We could have done this by using just say I'm just creating an object of a person P. So and then I would just write I would create a new object of maybe person P1, and then I would just assign P1 equal to a new of P1s, right? So P1 equal to P, or even that should work, right? So what would happen if I do it like that, right? Let's have a quick look at this. So I'm just creating a sample, yeah, sample over here. So I'm having an order class which just accepts two properties, the order ID and the order name. Yeah, I'm having a default constructor which is public. This one is actually not required. I can skip this particular part, but yeah, I just created is for just for normal purposes. Yeah, I'm taking a constructor which accepts a parameter of order. Basically, just whatever I'm passing as a order object, I'm just copying it to the order ID so that I can create a new instance of an already existing class. Yeah. The another option object constructor that I have created over here, which takes the order ID and the order name, and just basically it creates an object of that particular instance. So let's have a quick look of things around this. Yeah. And then we can have, so what I'm doing over here is, okay, let's have a quick look at an example. So what I'm doing over here is, so I'm creating an object of an order which takes two parameters. One is the order ID and the order name. So I'm creating it as first order, right? I'm as per I wonder like what would happen if I do, right? If I created a second instance named a second order, and I'm assigning the first order object values inside the second order object, right? So what should happen over here? So and in the subsequent line I'm writing it as, so this one is a second object, right? So if I write second order dot order name, and I'm just upgrading the order name to second order, yeah, I'm just keeping the rest of things as it is. Yeah. And if I do a console dot write line of this particular things, right, say for example order ID and the order name, so you can see over here, so I've just written the order ID of the first order and the first order dot order name. In the second line I've written the second order dot order ID and second order dot order name, and you can clearly see over here, right? So I created a copy of this, right? In this particular, we were expecting that the object should not update the first instance, right? But over here you can clearly see that the order ID remains the same, but the order name of both the objects is just referring to the same instance in the memory, right? So it's not creating a separate instance of a new, right, of a new uh, it's not getting a second instance, and that is where the copy constructor comes into as a help, right, as a savior for us. And then say for example, I would just give you an example over here. So what I have done over here is created the first order. So I've created a new object of order, right? O. So before copy, you can see over here it's O dot order ID, and you can see before copy the order ID and the order name remains the same, right? I created a new object. Yeah, I'm passing the same O parameter, like the O instance, to this particular new order, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm writing, I'm outputting the new order, which is the same, this particular line, yeah, the first order. And again, after printing out, I'm just writing it as new order name, right? So and now I'm printing out both the objects, that is O dot order ID and O dot order name. And over here I'm writing is O new order, that is the new instance of the order class. Yeah, I'm writing it over here, and here you can see the order ID and the order name for both this particular uh, class. Yeah, for both this class, and over here you can see the first object, the first instance of order remains as it is. And since I've done it using constructors, right, a new order is all, like I've used the copy constructor over here, and in the end I'm getting the new order name, and the first instance of the constructor remains as it is, and there is no change over there, while this particular order ID and the order name is, so I'm able to see a new play a new the order new order name over here, and I'm able to see a new order name over here, right? So yeah. Okay, so this one was about the default constructor, parameterized constructor, and things associated with it, right? Let's have a quick look at another type of constructor, which is private constructor. Yep. So let's first go through the theory, and then um, let's go through the theory first, and then we can move on to the how exactly that's done, right? So I just increase the font size. Just give me a minute. Okay, I think this one should be visible. Okay, so the private constructor, yeah, is a special instance constructor which is used in classes that contains static member only. We would have a quick look at why exactly we are stating this. Yep, and how it's actually uh, useful. Yeah, if a class with one or more private constructors and no public constructors, right? So if I'm having a class with just private constructors and no public constructors, you should not like you would not be able to create an object of a class which contains just the private constructors. So the object creation is stopped. You cannot inherit that particular class, right? So only the also the inheritance is stopped. So if that's the case, then the class is not usable, right? But that's not true. See, you can see over here uh, we have clearly written a class that contains static member only. So now if you want to use that class for some kind of purpose of us, then we have to define the static members inside that particular class so that it can be used for our say for example, it can be used in our coding, right? So we can I would just share you some example over here. Yeah. So let's have a quick look about the private constructor. So I would just for this particular right. So over here, what I've done is I've created a class named as student. Yeah. Now a student can be an engineer as well, right? So I'm creating a class of a student here. What would happen? So as of now, I'm having a public student constructor inside it, which is writing some kind of console.write line, just hi, right? So what would happen? Okay, so what would happen if I comment out this particular part of code and uncomment this particular? So I've created a constructor which is just student. So now and definitely this particular student class is not exactly usable. So what would happen if I do uh, student is equal to new of student? Yeah. So over here you can see the student class is inaccessible, yeah, because I'm having just a private constructor. I'm not having, so you cannot create an object of this student class, right? You cannot inherit the object inside the engineer because even the student is inaccessible, right? The constructor is inaccessible. So say for example, if I'm not able to create an object of a class, if I'm not able to inherit the class, then there is no use that we generally have, right? But over here you can see over here, right? So a class that just contains a static, right? Only static uh, so there is no usage of a private constructor in that case, right? So if a class just holds a private constructor, then there would be no use of it, right? So that's not true, right? Because we already have written over here is a class can have some static members. So let's have a quick look of how we can deal things with a static a class with just private constructors and also deal with a static. So now say for example, I'm creating a, so this one is just a sample. We can have, so what I'm doing is I'm creating an object of like I'm creating a class with just a private constructor. So you can see over here I'm just creating a private constructor, and what we are also doing is we are creating some all the properties, all the instance of that particular constructor to be static. Yeah. So you can see over here the constructor that we are declaring over here is a static constructor. Yeah. And which just has it has a created on property which we are initializing to long to datetime long. Yeah, and we are just having. So if I use this particular, so now I'm able to create an instance of this particular uh, object, right? So say for example, what would happen if I use something called as, so also to check a fact over here, I'm creating, so this particular is a private constructor, right? And this is a private constructor, and what would happen if I create, if I pass it as a parameter, I'm not getting any uh, error over here, right? So we would check this particular part again in the static constructor section, but just keep in mind that I'm able to pass this particular class as a parameter to the to a normal class. So if I'm using a parameter constructor, private constructor, so I'm still able to pass some parameters over here. So if I want to write something called as integer data, yeah, so if I write it over here, I should not be I will not get any kind of errors over here. So I would be able to do some kind of tweaks if I want it, right? So let's have a look at this particular one. So I'm just creating an instance of this particular class, and in the end I'm writing the object over here, right? So I'm just waiting for some couple of 2 seconds, and then I'm writing what is the time it was created on. So over here you can see the created. So even though I'm calling the constructor, right, I'm calling in the get instance of this created on. So it's a static property, right? So once it's initialized to a particular value, it would remain like it would just, I would not say it would remain the same, but all the instances inside that particular class, like if you're calling it from the same, it would just refer to the same instance of that particular property. And any addition or subtraction or anything like that, if I'm doing some kind of any operations that I'm performing, it would just be performed on the same object and not on any other object, right? So this one was an example of a private constructor. Let's have a quick look at the on the static constructor as well. Yeah. So okay, let's have a quick look at the static constructor as well. Yeah. We discussed about default constructor, parameterized constructor, copy constructor, even the private constructor. So now let's have a quick look at the static constructor, right? So a static constructor does not take any access modifiers or have any parameters, right? So this particular part we already checked, wherein we tried to pass some parameters to it, but we are not able to do that, right? So a static constructor, and also it doesn't take any kind of access modifiers, right? So let's try writing some kind of access modifier to this. So I'm not able to write any kind of access modifiers. It throws me an error saying that access modifiers are not allowed on static constructors, right? So for example, if I write private, yeah, so even that's not allowed. So any kind of static modifier, like any kind of accesses, so that's not possible. Also we can have just one static constructor. So say for example, I'm writing it as a static constructor over here. So you can see over here the constructor must be parameterless, right? So say for example, it must so you're missing, so it has to be, say for example, I'm writing it. So either this one would work or this one would work. So we are having some. So this one is not possible over here, right? Uh, Also, a static constructor, a class with static constructor cannot be inherited or overloaded. So we already checked about overloading, right? So we cannot create a class with different like overloaded constructors. So even that was not possible. Even that cannot be inherited, right? So say for example, uh, I'm creating a static class, right? So you can see over here, I cannot inherit that particular. class, right? So a static class with just static constructors cannot be inherited as well, right? So say for example, okay, I would just comment out this one, comment out this one, this one, this one, and this one. And let's see, I would just remove the static keyword. Right. Okay. So a static constructor cannot be called directly. So when we declare a constructor to be static, it's not something like if I create a new object of a constructor at that time, it would be created, or whenever we create an object of it. The static constructors, it is not the user who decides when the constructor to be called, but it is actually the program that decides when the constructor to be called. You have literally no like when the constructor would be executed, we have no idea about it. So it's generally so whenever it is invoked by the common language runtime automatically, so the user has no control when the static constructor would be executed in the program, right? The static so if you don't provide a constructor to a static initialize fields, all this so if you are declaring some properties, right, and if you don't initialize them to a particular value, right, in that case what would happen is it would default the properties would be defaulted to the default values. So for example, if it's a int, then it would be default to 0. If it's a string, then it would default to null, right? So the default values would be taken on its own if you don't provide any kind of values to the static properties inside the static constructor, right? So and also say for example, at a particular line of a code, right, if some values are being like, if there is an error with a particular value, right, so the further line of code would never be executed inside that particular class, and it would be always be valued would like it would never get initialized, right? And all the time it would be having just the same value, like the default values would be over there whenever we declare a class and some exception occurs, right? So also, a drawback of having a static constructor is you cannot pass any kind of parameters to it, and the this particular, like say for example, if you uh, if you you do not have any kind of option, like you would call it again and then it would initialize to a particular value, right? So this particular, also this one is one of the main points I would say. So the runtime calls a static constructor no more than once in a single application domain, right? So that's just a single time call, right? The call is made in a locked region based on the specific type of clause, right? So so if you're declaring that to be static, is just and no additional locking mechanisms are required in the body of the static constructor. So say for example, if you're writing a static constructor, it executes inside a locked state. You do not have to write any kind of locking mechanism on inside the constructor, so that no the properties would be initialized to a default value or any kind of issues. So it just executes inside a locking mechanism, and uh, no additional locking is required when you declare a static constructor, right? Let's have a mm, okay. Let's uncomment the part that we already commented out, right? So, for example, this one is a bus. I'm having a constructor with some public properties over here, and I just declare a parameterized constructor over here of which takes an root number, and in the end, I'm just assigning it to the property over here and writing the root number over here. So the bus route I'm writing here, and whenever I perform an execution of a drive, right, at that time I'm writing that the root number, how much milliseconds it took, and some kind of and when it actually started, right? So I'm just creating. So over here you can see I'm creating a get bus data which takes a parameter of bus. So say for example, uh, if I create a class to be static over here, you can see you're getting an error over here, right? In the get data you cannot pass a parameter. So let's have a look. So static type cannot be used as parameter. So even one of a drawback of having a class to be static is you cannot pass it as a parameter, but that's not true in case of a private if you're creating a private constructor, you can still create some parameters to it and pass some values to that particular uh, the private constructor. Though you cannot create an object of it, but you can still pass some values, some default values which were in which you created during some static generation, because you are having some default values, right? So whenever you are creating a class, right, if you default it to a particular values, right, and then you can pass some parameters to that. You can see over here I'm creating, so you can see over here I'm creating an object of a bus b1 equal to new of bus, right? I'm creating two different objects, two different object of the bus class, right? I'm just writing a drive, and also you can see over here I'm writing the, yeah. So yeah, in the end we were, so over here you can see that the global start time is set to this particular value, right? And after execution this you can see over here the global time for this particular is remaining the same after 46 minutes or this. So it's just actually referring to the same object each and every time, since we are declaring the global start time to a particular value, right? Okay, let's have some quick look around some different concepts that we have in the constructor. So this one is a constructor chaining concept. What happens is, say for example, if you're having a class, right, you're declaring a class have different parameters to it, right? A class with many parameters, and you're calling a constructor inside another constructor, then it calls that particular concept is called as constructor chaining. So let's have a quick look at this particular example. So over here you can see I'm creating a class, right? I'm creating class with two different constructors. One is having let's declare a public property of int which takes it as a age. I'm declaring a voter, right? So this one is this of 18. So say for example, if I'm declaring a constructor, right, with I'm just writing it as if I want the voting age in India is generally 18, right? So say for example, if I'm writing this, right? Okay, I'm writing a public voter int 20 int age, right? Over here I'm writing age equal to age. Yeah. Okay, let's understand about the concept of constructor chaining, right? Say for example, what I'm doing over here. So the constructor chaining is a concept which basically, if you're calling one constructor within another constructor, right? This particular concept of constructor chaining comes into picture, right? So let's have a look at how constructor chaining works, right? So I'm declaring a voter. So by default, when you declare the default voting size, age limit inside India is 18, right? So if I'm declaring a voter with passing no default parameters, then the default value that if it's a voter, we are default considering to be a 18 years itself, right? So I'm just writing it as the voter with if I just create an object with passing no parameters, then it would create a voter person with a default of 18 age. So for example, if I'm passing an age to that particular uh, if I'm passing the age to that particular voter class, then it would pick the past value, that is the value that we are actually sending. Yeah. So over here we can see over here the voter is 18 and voter 24 is around. So say for example, for what I've written over here is, so right, I've created the object with this. So over here I'm creating an object of voter, which so over also I'm creating, if I'm passing it as a parameter, it takes the object, it takes the value as 24. So but if I don't pass any kind of values over here, it internally calls the another parameter, parameterized constructor, right? It internally calls the another parameterized constructor with this particular value, because this denotes the same class, right? And which is having a parameter of 18. So it by default takes the value of 18, and it still works, right? What would happen if I don't pass any kind of parameters like this, right? So I'm getting an error. Let's try this then. Yeah. And if I run this, I'm getting an age to 0, right? So it would by default take the values to 0, but that's not this is not what we wanted to prove. Yeah, we wanted to prove that this particular constructor chaining concept is working, right? And this works in this particular fashion. What about constructor overloading? So this particular concept we already talked, wherein we are having multiple a class with multiple constructors. So we can declare more than one constructor inside a class. So that particular concept is called as constructor overloading. Yeah. Let's have a look at some different question and answers associated with this particular constructor concept, right? So I would just increase the size, because now we would be just discussing about the question and answers associated with it. So I would just increase the font size to a bit bigger, just to. Yeah. So is it mandatory to have a default and parameters constructor in a class? The answer would be no. Can we have default and private constructor inside a class? So we saw that we can have a constructor with multiple different type of parameters as well as the private constructor. So the answer is yes. Can we create an object of a constructor if it has only private constructor? So the answer is no. Can we inherit a class if it has only a private constructor? No. Can we have parameters inside a private constructor? So the answer is yes. We checked it that we can pass some parameters to a private constructor as well. Can we have access modifiers on a static constructor? Yeah. So the answer is no. We checked. We cannot pass some different parameters to them. Can we have parameters in a static constructor? No, you cannot have. When we create an instance of a child class, which constructor is called, child or a parent, right? So always when you're declaring a constructor, in this one is true in terms of like in terms of constructor, but it's not true in terms of whenever you declare a method. So we would have a look, we would have a separate video uh, around this, which particular method is called, which particular constructor is called, but we would have a separate video. But generally, like always, the parent constructor would be called first and then the child constructor, while the destructor, if you're talking about the destructor, it is always called in the end, right? Can we call the base class parameter, like can we call base class parameters constructor from the child class? Uh, right. So yes, we can write this particular, which we checked over here. So this or a base class, if we want to write from the child class, we can call it right. So this one is a concept of the question of constructor chaining, right? If we have only parameterized constructor in the base class, can we create an object of the child class? The interview over here is trying to ask, can I create an object of a constructor? Say, for example, if I'm having a person P with a default age of just 18, I expect some kind of parameters to it, and can I create an object of person P equal to new of person P without passing any kind of parameters to it? So you would get an error over here if the class base class is just having a parameterized constructor, or if the class is having just parameterized constructor and no default or no default or no constructor is defined over there, right? With passing no values. So yeah, that's all I was having for this particular video. If you guys have any questions or comments about the video, if you want any different kind of videos which we think are frequently asked during the interviews, just add in the comment section. I would happy to help you guys with how we can answer few the particular questions. Yep. Uh, thank you everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.